Tonight, nearly 10,000 migrants a day. That is what federal officials say they are encountering at the U.S. southern border on average in December. That's among the highest numbers ever recorded. And with multiple border entry points remaining closed as the surge at the southern border escalates, U.S. officials now warning that the situation is nearing a, quote, breaking point. Ed Lavandera is out front.
Apprehensions of migrants crossing the southern U.S. border are once again reaching record levels. A Department of Homeland Security official tells CNN the average number of encounters in the last week is 9,600 per day. This rate of apprehensions has not been seen since earlier this year, in the days before the lifting of the COVID-era restriction known as Title 42. Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez says the situation is spiraling out of control again.
Border Patrol agents are doing everything they can to take care of the situation, but they are completely overwhelmed, completely just overwhelmed with the situation.
Today, I want to talk about immigration, illegal immigration to the United States. I think that we're not being told the correct picture of how things really are. And that's what I want to discuss with you today. I'm going to break it down. I'm going to give you the truth of how immigration works, what is the reason for it, and how we are actually being lied to by our government, the United States. Okay? Now, here's the thing. Me watching the government throughout all the years and being into politics and trying to understand the world we live in, I learned one thing, especially in this country. Nothing happens by accident. If there's a war on drugs, the government's doing the war on drugs and making it worse. When the government says everyone needs a home, we get the 2008 housing bubble. Anything the government gets involved in, they just make it worse. Anything the government says that they cannot stop, it's because they want it to continue. We need to understand that this is the reality of how our government works. Nothing happens without the government fully having control over that situation. If the situation is out of control, it's because the United States government wants it that way. There's fentanyl in the United States because the government is allowing it. When I was growing up in the 80s, as a kid, the crack epidemic was because the government wanted it. In the 70s, there was a heroin epidemic in the New York City area because the government wanted it. When they wanted to crack down on crime in the 90s, they passed the 1994 crime bill. When they wanted to clean up New York City in the 90s, they did that. New York City was, when I was growing up in 1992, New York City hit 2,000 murders, the highest murder rate ever recorded in New York City. I was born and raised in the Bronx. It was nothing to hear gunfire, driving down the Grand Concourse all the time. Always hearing about this one getting shot, this one getting killed. All right? That was just life, especially from the part of the Bronx I was from. And then, because the government decided to clean it up, from 1992 down to 2000, when Mayor Giuliani left, it was a totally different city. I can't even tell you how many times I got stopped and frisked. It was just, that was it. It was a fact of life. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when the government wants to crack down on something, they'll go ahead and do that. When things are out of control, it's because they have an agenda and that's the way they want it to be. That's part one. We need to understand that and just live with that fact. So when you hear all these, the Fox Newses and the CNN, and they're saying, and the government saying they can't control immigration, the border's out of control, oh my God, they don't know what to do about it, that's all lies. Because they've controlled, we have the same borders we've always had. Mexico has always been there, okay? And Mexico was more poor before than it is now. The problem is that the United States was not playing games back then. They had that border shut. During the time of Ellis Island, when most of the Jews, the Italians, and the Irish came, the United States was wide open. Why? The United States wanted it to be open. So they bring everybody over from Europe in large numbers. We have to understand the situation that we're living in is something that the government is propagating. That's the way they want it to be. So let's understand why. because in one hand they tell you, oh, we need to fix it. It's a problem. We don't know what's going on. These people are just coming in. I don't know who doesn't remember when Joe Biden said, rush the border when he gets elected. And, it's not a Republican or Democratic thing. And that's what I'm going to let you know now. It's on both sides. When either one is in there, it's just something that festers. So why? Let's ask the why. We always have to ask, okay, they're promoting open borders. Why? Let's get to the why. Here's the thing. The economic system of the United States is that of capitalism. Capitalism creates the highest standard of living in recorded history. No economic system has created more wealth, has moved people from poverty to the middle class, from the middle class to wealth. No other economic system achieves that. Socialism doesn't do it. Communism, the hell doesn't do it. Only capitalism. Problem with capitalism is the way it functions is that you always need a large stream of workers at the bottom, because as people move up, there are just certain jobs they're just not going to do. So you always need, in a capitalist-based society, a capitalistic economic system, you always need low-skilled grunt workers to fulfill the bottom rung of your economy. Because the way that economy is set up, people rise, okay? And then you lose that bottom rung base of workers. I'll give you a for instance. When the Irish first came over, the English were the mainstream Americans. So when they came over, they were doing those, they were digging the ditches and doing manual labor. But within 30 to 40 years, they started moving in to the civil service jobs and being the police officers and being the council members and being mayors of New York City, Boston, Philadelphia. You start off at the bottom, you have children, they become Americanized, they get a little more education than the generation before them, and they move up. So the Italians and the Jews come in. When the Jews and the Italians came in, they were below the Irish economically in this country because the Irish came first. So who built all the trains, the tunnels in New York, and they were doing all the construction and the skyscrapers and doing all hard labor? It was the immigrants that came in, right? Within 30 to 40 years, an Irishman was already president. The Irish already have moved up into mainstream Americans, being, lawyers and the heads of corporate companies, senators, governors. The Jews already are starting to move up. The Italians and everyone else from Europe. So what happened is that you don't have that bottom rung worker. So then what does the United States do? They passed in the 1960s, they passed a law. I forgot the exact year, where basically they opened immigration up into the United States. Because in a capitalist system, you always need low-skilled workers. Corporations demand it. They ask Washington for it. And because European immigrants weren't coming to the United States anymore, in the 60s, I think it was the 1965 Immigration Act. I forgot the year, but it happened in the 60s. Another problem happened that affected the population of the United States forever and to this day is abortion. I know people don't want to admit it, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to have abortions, fine. But the bottom line is you're not going to be producing as many babies as those countries that don't have it. If you travel to Latin America, you travel to Asia, aside from, Japan and China, go to Thailand, go to Vietnam, go to the Middle East, you go to Africa, you're going to see kids everywhere. There's no immigration to those countries because they don't need them. They don't want them. There's no need for it. You go to the Philippines, there's kids everywhere. The problem with having legalized abortion, it affects your workforce. So by the 80s, you had large amounts of immigration starting into the United States. It wasn't to the levels you see now, but a lot of people were coming in. I remember the changes in New York. You had large immigration from the South of African Americans working in the factories in Detroit and New York, all across the North, the need for those workers. So in the 80s, I started seeing the changes. And you would see, different Latin groups coming in, different, I'll put it this way. When I was a kid, real young, the European population in New York was made up of Irish, Jewish, and Italian, and obviously anything else sprinkled in. But those were the three main European groups. The Puerto Ricans were the only Latin group in New York, and African Americans were really the only blacks, with maybe a sprinkle of Jamaicans here and there. That's what New York was in the 70s. I started to see the change in the 80s. In the 80s, we started to see Dominicans coming in large, more the just immigrants from everywhere. And then by the 90s, forget it. But the reason why they don't want to tell people who've been here, whose parents have been here the longest, and they don't want to admit it, is that this is the way they need it to be. You always need low-skilled workers in a capitalist society. It just has to be that way. Part number 2, they don't want to admit, is that the nation is in debt. $35 trillion, supposedly. Some estimate that it's higher. When you count in all the Social Security and the Medicaid, $100 trillion. So they're saying that the nation is in debt, $35 trillion. Some economists say that it's actually $100 trillion. So how does the government make money? That's government debt. How does the government make money? The government makes money by taxing its citizens. So if I am in debt, whatever number it is, and I need to pay that down or figure a way to make it easier, what do I need to do? If I'm taxing citizens and that's how I'm making money as a government, what do I need to do? I need more citizens to tax. That is why that border is open. That's the main reason. If that border was not open and you didn't have all these people coming in, Social Security will go bankrupt, would have been bankrupt. Medicaid would have been bankrupt. The government probably would have defaulted by now. Now, I want you to think about something. The minute a person steps foot in this country, they pay taxes immediately. You hear the talk, well, these people don't pay tax. Trust me, you pay taxes. You're maybe not paying federal, but you're paying something. Every time you buy food, you pay a tax. You put gas, you pay a tax. You buy a car, you're paying a tax. It's like a skim. The more people you have, you just skim off the top. You skim off a little bit of their paychecks. You just take off the top. You keep taking off the top. And when a nation is in high amounts of debt, like this nation is, the way to alleviate that debt is to open that border and let more people in so that they can tax, so that they can have children and they can have Social Security numbers so they can be taxed. That's the bottom line of what's going on. And that's the reason why we're all being lied to. I wish they would just be honest and tell it like it is. The nation is in debt. We need to open the border, let people in so we could tax them. If not, everything crumbles. But they're not saying that. They're saying, oh, we can't control it. We don't know what's happening. They all know what's happening. Trust me, the United States government knows what's going on. They just don't want to admit it to you. And once you realize that, you'll see it in a different light. Now, one thing I know about the United States government, they never do anything for one reason. It's multi-dimensional chess. There has to be multiple reasons for any one move the government makes. So it helps them pay off the, at least if not pay off the debt, it allows the debt not to be crushing. Right now, the United States is paying a minimum of $1 trillion in interest payment on the debt. Do you understand what can be done with $1 trillion every year in infrastructure and just improvement of roads and just services to the citizens of this country? It's $1 trillion getting flushed down the toilet and going into the pockets of who knows who. So we need to understand that that's one main reason, but there's other reasons. We need that no one's going into the military. The easiest way for you as a male adult to become a citizen is to go into the military. So it's a way to get more soldiers because the United States is always fighting a war somewhere. So that's another reason. Then the Democrats and the Republicans have their own reasons. With the Democrats, they're hoping that they flood the United States with enough immigrants that are beholden to them that will then turn the Republican Party into a regional party who will never seat another president again. That's one agenda in one part of the government. All right? But that's the situation and why we're seeing what we're seeing. We're not being told the truth, and that is the reason why it's happening. Also, it's a lot of things. Think about this. I've been looking at statistics, and we have a lot of private jails. Americans are not committing crimes like they used to. They just don't. Even right now, there is not 2,000 murders in New York. You know, the all-time highs of the 90s, you just don't see it anymore. Overall crime under certain ethnic groups in the United States that have been here the longest, we know who they are. They're just not committing crimes like they used to. So you have a lot of private prisons. We need people to fill those jails. There's a whole industry built around crime in this country, from the police budgets to the prosecutors to the judges. Everything that happens in this country is done for a reason. And there's multiple reasons to allow it to happen or to stop it. We have to get into that mindset. I'll give you another one. Why is fentanyl out there now? Why? Because they're legalizing cannabis. So now they want to move everyone into that market. So now you can't just right now, it's not like it used to be where you could just, talk to some street dealer and get whatever. You might not wake up the next day. All done on purpose. They don't talk about that. They don't want to tell you the truth. That's why fentanyl has been released on the country. Everybody will tell you can't, it's not like the old days where you could just, cop and it'll be okay. You don't know what you're getting now. So as every state legalizes and does whatever it is, then people will just transition because they're users anyway in some way, form, or fashion. You see how they move things around. So that's the situation with immigration. I'm also going to tell you, if you want to know the future of the United States, I want you to look at Latin America. There's a lot of videos on YouTube where you can just look at, cities like Medellin and Cali and Brazil and things like that. And the same thing is happening in Europe. The same thing is happening here is happening in Europe because they're mostly capitalistic. They've allowed abortions in their country, and hey, can't have your cake and eat it too. So you have to import people, import workers, because the corporations demand it. The lobbyists, they go to Washington, we need workers. We can't wait for people to grow up to 16 and 17 years later when they're ready to hit the job market. Open the floodgate now. That's what's happening in Washington, and that's what's happening in Europe. So if you want to know the future of the United States, look at Latin America. The United States is going to look racially the way Latin America looks. In Latin America, pick the country, even Mexico, there's a small European ruling elite. Brown is in the middle, and everyone else is in the bottom. And we know who's in the bottom. That's Latin America, and that's the way it's going to work here. Guarantee it. That's how they're going to work the United States. That's the future of the United States. They're never going to tell us this. You have to be able to see it. And that's the situation we're dealing with. I hope we learned something. I hope I gave you some new information, maybe something to think about. But everything I said is the truth. You guys have a good one. Stay safe.